About politics, 2 hours of news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster. Well, now, further heavy rain is expected across northern England today, as the Environment Agency has warned that there is still a risk of significant flooding. And the Prince of Wales will visit Pontypridd later today to meet some of those whose homes have been damaged. But there is mounting criticism from the flood victims that the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has not done enough to help them. Ashna Horinag reports.
The damage in Ironbridge is done. Debbie watched on as her cottage was deluged by the torrent. She had to camp out upstairs when the river level reached more than 6 metres.
We've had about 2 foot in the house. Yesterday there was very little we could do, so we just had to wait for the river to recede, and then today it has gone out the house and now it's a clean-up exercise.
There's an air of defiance about people here, but they're exhausted too. Vic doesn't know where to begin with the clear-up.
Started to get in there this morning, out the door, and had to walk away. They're a bit stronger now. A bit of savings, what we got, we put into this. So, is it important? Yeah. It's all we got.
Pontypridd in South Wales has been badly hit.
The walls pushed it over.
Floodwater gushed into these homes in the middle of Wednesday night.
Be careful, Sarah, right?
Smashing through a wall and rushing through the front door. This estate is at the bottom of a steep hill, and when it rains, the water runs down straight into the houses.
Hello, I'm Alex, nice to meet you. I'm the local MP. So what do you think needs to happen now for you to not be flooded again?
Condemn the houses.
They're not fit to be
because you can't, it's natural up there. I just don't think we should have to keep going through this.
No, you shouldn't.
Later today, Prince Charles will visit the town and meet those affected. He may arrive in a deluge. More rain is expected today. Egypt Street was one of the worst hit areas in Pontypridd. And now they're clearing out.
By the time we actually got downstairs, the water was up our knees. I've never seen this. No. I've never seen this in my all 12 years I've been here.
The cost of flooding is expected to run into the hundreds of millions. Its impact will be felt for months as those in the thick of it desperately try to save their homes.
Well, Ashna joins me now live from Hampton Bishop in Herefordshire. And Ashna, I can see they're trying to deal there with what has happened to them, but also fearful, I guess, about what may be coming their way again.
Absolutely, Dermot. There are these 2 severe flood warnings in place, which does mean a danger to life. For the community here, it really is quite worrying. Take a look at this field that's been completely deluged by the water. It's completely unknown exactly how much is in there, but as you were saying, the Environment Agency is trying to do something about this in the form of these 5 pumps that have been set up behind me, desperately trying to filter through that water and shove it straight back into the River Lug, which runs alongside me. These 5 pumps have been going since the early hours of this morning, desperately trying to just get as much water away from these homes as possible. In terms of what these residents in Hampton Bishop have been through over the last few days, well, they're completely cut off. It is a complete island. They very much don't have any food at all. They haven't had any fresh food, certainly since Monday, and even yesterday a care home had to be evacuated of people. A lot of elderly residents had to be rescued from there. The reason why this is such a particular cross-section which has been caught up in all of this is because the River Wye and the River Lug have swollen, completely taking over this particular village. The rain is starting to come down slightly now, but over the next few days it's going to get even worse, particularly hitting the north of England, the Pennines, Yorkshire especially. But with people who have got about a metre's worth of water still in their houses over here, the worry is even with 50 or 60 millimetres more, that's still going to be rain that is particularly unwelcome. But one thing's for sure, we can't even get into the village. You need a tractor to do so. So little consolation for people that are actually stuck in there today.
OK, Ashna, thanks for the update. Ashna Horinag there. Well, I want to talk now with our political correspondent, Rob Powell, about another dimension of the environment, the Environment Secretary going to announce today that they're going to do something to deal with pollution. But I mean, everyone's big concern about the environment is, of course, these floods, and no sign of Boris Johnson there.
Yeah, there's been a lot of criticism the last 24 hours or so, people like the Fire Brigades Union coming out and essentially accusing Boris Johnson of shirking his responsibilities. I think what the government is saying, what we've heard from ministers, is that they don't want there to be a sort of media jamboree in these places, and they're leaving it to DEFRA, to the Environment Department, to get on with it. As you say, they have announced an environment policy this morning, just affecting England. It's basically a ban on bags of traditional coal that you would buy for your open fires or wood-burning stoves. That'll come in February 2021. Also, wet wood as well, because the moisture in it produces more pollution. So I think this will probably affect more people in rural areas, lots of city areas.
Well, I mean, will there be fines
bans.
if you continue to use them after that day?
Well, you just won't be able to sell it. So by February 2021, you won't be able to go to, say, the garden centre or the petrol station and pick up those net bags you see of wet wood. So I think they're hoping to
cut off supply.
Exactly, and give manufacturers, I think, some notice so that they can change what they're buying, what they're selling.
Now, what's about the Home Secretary? For several days now, there have been these allegations going around about her culture, her attitude, running that department, and indeed one she's run before, a culture of bullying. Yeah,
what we do know is that there are splits, tensions right at the top of the Home Office, that Priti Patel has had run-ins with the permanent secretary there, Sir Philip Rutnam, the most senior civil servant at the Home Office. One of those points of tension is understood to be about how to deal with Extinction Rebellion protesters who brought parts of London to a standstill in the last 12 months or so, about whether the police had enough powers to prevent them, to prevent a specific practice of sort of gluing and chaining themselves inside tubes onto highways. Now, that's understood to be more about whether they can take preventative action rather than necessarily roughing up protesters, which I think some worried that might be about. It's understood to be disputes about policy, though, nothing personal. I think what is more sinister is some of the allegations that are going around around whether Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, has bullied other officials and civil servants. And I've spoken to two people who worked in previous departments that Priti Patel was involved in, who said that whilst they had very little direct contact with her, she was not well liked at those departments. Now, speaking to those...
she wouldn't be the first Secretary of State that's been said about, would she?
Exactly, and I think this is the balance. You talk to those close to Priti Patel right now and they say, look, she is a demanding minister, she works 7 days a week, she's got a lot of work at the Home Office and wants to drive through her agenda. They say that bullying allegations, they completely deny there. They say there's been no official complaints. So I think it is that balance, and the unknown, I think, is whether this is just a determined minister with a lot on her plate or whether this is something more sinister and there is bullying going on.
Rob, thank you very much indeed. Rob Powell there. Well, now, British passengers stranded on a cruise ship hit by coronavirus in Japan are due to begin their journey home today. Around about 70 will return to the UK on an aircraft chartered by the government, as long as they agree to enter quarantine when they get back to the UK. Let's take you through some of the numbers on COVID-19. There are now almost 77,000 suspected and confirmed cases of it, the vast majority still in China. The total number of deaths now stands at more than 2,000. That's according to the Johns Hopkins Centre for Systems Science and Engineering. A death in South Korea now means the number of fatalities which have occurred outside mainland China has gone up to 11. We'll update that for you. 2 other people have died on the Diamond Princess, with 634 cases now confirmed on the ship. Well, Siobhan Robbins has the very latest for us from Yokohama on these Britons about to be flown home, Siobhan.
Yes, that's right. They've been desperately waiting for this day. 17 days they've been in quarantine on this ship. And we've seen an email shown to passengers on board telling them that they will be leaving. They'll be starting to disembark the ship at around 11 o'clock tonight, just after 11 o'clock. When they come off, they're all going to have had to have health checks to prove that they're fit to fly. And actually, I've been speaking to passengers throughout the day here. They said those health checks are starting around now in their rooms. And presumably, Dr. doctors will be looking for warning signs like spikes in temperature, any other symptoms that could suggest they have contracted COVID-19. As you know, more than 600 people on board the ship have now tested positive. Anyone who does test positive is not allowed on that evacuation flight home. And so once they've disembarked, they'll go to a nearby airport. We expect them to leave in the early hours of Saturday morning, so given the time difference, they should land in the UK, in Wiltshire, early on Saturday morning, your time. They'll then go up to the Wirral, to that quarantine facility that we've seen evacuees coming back from Wuhan use, and they'll stay there for 2 weeks. And as you can imagine, the people I've been speaking to today are really reluctant to do another 14 days quarantine. It's desperately boring. They have been stuck in their cabins here, but they do understand that, of course, there is a risk to the UK population that the government is trying to stop, and that's why they have to do this quarantine. And also, given the fact that 2 Australians who under Japanese tests that were on board the ship tested negative. They went back to Australia in the evacuation plane. They have now tested positive. We also know that with the Americans earlier in the week, 14 of those who got on board tested positive as well. We understand from reports locally that number has gone up too. So you can see why these quarantine periods are being imposed at home. But when we look at the wider picture, you were talking there about the situation in China and around the world. South Korea, a death this week as well. South Korea is actually a place to really keep an eye on. There's been a spike in the number of cases, more than 150 now. 50 of them, again, more than 50 actually, confirmed today. Big questions around an area called Daegu, where many of the cases are linked, it's believed, to a religious group. So people there have been told to stay in their homes if they can. People at the garrison have been told to not go into the town. And the Prime Minister has said this is now an emergency situation. So they're looking at sending extra medics, extra medical supplies as well down from Seoul. So you can see that much of Asia, as with much of the world, is really keeping a strong eye on the emerging COVID-19 cases, because they've seen what happens in China and they don't want to be the next country fighting a massive uptick in cases.
OK, Siobhan, thanks for the update. Siobhan Robbins there in Yokohama. Well, meanwhile,